Sergeant Charles Macchione was born in Macomb, Illinois on July 24, 1945. His parents' names were Charles and Rose. Mr. Macchione's father served in the U.S. Army during World War II, and his grandfather served in the Army in World War I. He also had an uncle that served in the Korean War. Having many family members that were veterans caused Mr. Macchione to feel that if the time came where he was needed, he would serve his country. Mr. Macchione is the oldest of 3 children, and he has 2 younger sisters named Nancy and Connie. Before he entered the Army, he had just graduated high school and was training to become a machinist at Westinghouse Air Brake in Wilmerding, Pennsylvania. Mr. Macchione was drafted into the U.S. Army October of 1965. We asked him if he was nervous when he was drafted.
No, I wasn't really nervous. I was more excited. I don't know. It was kind of a funny time in my life. I was just turned 20 years old, and really, it was more of excitement and the unknown. So it was, to me, it was more exciting. I had no idea where I was going to end up and what I would be doing.
After being drafted, Mr. Macchione departed to go to training camp. He had his basic training in Fort Benning, Georgia. The training was very difficult because all the new soldiers had to get into top shape. However, Mr. Macchione said that he had it easier than some of the other guys because he was in pretty good shape already. After Mr. Macchione's basic training, he went to Fort Ord, California for advanced infantry training. After completing this training, he was sent back to Fort Benning, Georgia, and he became a part of the 586th Engineering Company. The job of the 586th Engineering Company was to build floating bridges. At Fort Benning, Mr. Macchione was trained in how to build the bridges. The floating bridges would be used to transport tanks and other vehicles across the river and also to transport troops. Here Mr. Macchione describes training how to build the bridges.
Well, when I got to Fort Benning, it was a bridge school I went to, and they taught us how to build floating bridges. We worked on the river. It was called the Chattahoochee River, which borders Georgia and Alabama. And we were called the River Rats, and we worked on the river every day.
Building bridges was Mr. Macchione's main job throughout his time in the Army, and he said he enjoyed doing this. His company built the bridges by blowing up pontoons, and then they put a rig on top of the pontoons so that the soldiers and vehicles could cross the river. In addition to Fort Ord and Fort Benning, Mr. Macchione was stationed at Fort Gordon, Georgia, and Camp Drum, New York, during his service.
Mr. Macchione made lots of new friends in the Army. He said this about the friends he made.
Oh, sure. We had a lot of. You were a family when you were training together. You were like family. You watched out after each other and guard each other's backs during the training, because that's situations that you have if you were in, if you were in any action.
However, Mr. Macchione tried to stay in touch with his family back home as well. There was a payphone on the base, and he would try to call home once a week in addition to writing letters occasionally. He didn't have a lot of time off because he was working 6 to 7 days a week, but in time off on weekends, he would often sightsee in the areas he was in. When he was in Fort Ord, California, he would get on a bus, go to San Francisco, and walk around. Mr. Macchione achieved the rank of Sergeant E5 during his time in the Army. He achieved this rank by being a good soldier, always listening and obeying superiors, being exceptional in certain aptitudes, and also because he knew the sergeant well because he was a mail courier at one time during his time in the Army. During Mr. Macchione's service, he earned the Good Conduct Service Medal, National Defense Service Medal, and medals for being awarded expert with his rifle. Mr. Macchione's active duty ended in October 1971 and he returned home. He said that the reception by his friends and family was good, but that the community's response to returning soldiers was not good. At that time, many people were protesting the war and saying bad things about Vietnam veterans. But Mr. Macchione said that he just tried to get back to work and ignore the negative people. A few years after getting out of the Army, Mr. Macchione got married, and him and his wife Donna had 4 children. Now, Mr. Macchione and his wife have 11 grandchildren and enjoy spending time with their family. He says that the military taught him many life lessons, including discipline, courtesy, and respect. He also said it gave him a great respect for all our men and women who serve, and also our police and first responders. Thank you for your service, Mr. Macchione.